Dr. Beatrice stared at the ultrasound monitor, her wide eyes reflecting a mix of disbelief and confusion. In her 10 years as a prison physician, she had seen many strange things, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The image on the screen was unmistakable, a tiny, flickering heartbeat. Pregnant. Lillian, the young inmate sitting on the gurney, was undeniably pregnant. The room was thick with silence, broken only by the faint hum of the machine. Beatrice tried to mask her shock, scribbling notes on the patient chart with trembling hands. Her mind raced for a logical explanation, but none came. How could this happen in a women's prison with no intimate visits and strict surveillance? "Claire," Beatrice called to the guard waiting by the door, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Could you call Supervisor Camille? Tell her it's urgent." Claire frowned but nodded, disappearing into the hallway. Beatrice turned to Lillian, who sat fidgeting on the gurney, her fingers tapping nervously against the edge. The young woman's eyes were wide with fear and confusion. "Doctor," Lillian stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "That thing on the screen. Is that really what I think it is? Am I really pregnant?" Beatrice took a deep breath, her professional demeanor faltering for a moment. "Yes, Lillian, you're pregnant. But the question is, how? How did this happen here?" Lillian looked away, her face pale. She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again, as if the words were too heavy to say. Before Beatrice could press further, the door swung open and Camille strode in, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "What's going on?" Camille asked, her tone clipped. She glanced from Beatrice to Lillian, her brow furrowing at the tension in the air. Beatrice gestured to the ultrasound monitor, her voice low. "Look for yourself." Camille stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied the screen. For a moment, she was silent. Then she shook her head, her voice incredulous. "Number. This can't be. She's pregnant. But how? She's the third one this week." "Exactly," Beatrice replied, crossing her arms. "Something is going on here, Camille. Something we're not seeing." Camille ran a hand over her face, her frustration evident. "This is impossible. There are no intimate visits here, no contact with the outside world. How are these women getting pregnant?" Lillian shifted uncomfortably on the gurney, her eyes darting between the two women. "I don't know how it happened," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I swear, I didn't do anything. Please, don't ask me any more." Camille's gaze hardened. "Lillian, you're the third woman to turn up pregnant in a week. This isn't a coincidence. We need to know what's going on. Now." Lillian recoiled, her hands clutching the edge of the gurney. "I told you. I don't know," she snapped, her voice rising. "If we're done here, I'm leaving." Before anyone could stop her, Lillian slid off the gurney and stormed out of the room, Claire trailing behind her. The door slammed shut, leaving Beatrice and Camille in stunned silence. Over the next few days, tension in the prison reached a boiling point. Beatrice and Camille spent hours reviewing security footage, searching for any clue that could explain the inexplicable pregnancies. They scrutinized every corridor, every courtyard, every interaction, but found nothing out of the ordinary. "This doesn't make sense," Camille muttered, leaning back in her chair. "We've checked every angle. There's no way someone could be sneaking in or out." Beatrice rubbed her temples, exhaustion etched into her face. "There has to be something we're missing. 3 pregnant women in a week? That's not just bad luck." Their investigation took a new turn when Louise, a timid young inmate, was brought to the infirmary complaining of stomach pains. Beatrice performed an ultrasound, her heart sinking as the familiar image appeared on the screen. "Louise," Beatrice said gently, "you're pregnant." The young woman burst into tears, her sobs echoing in the small room. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I made a mistake." Beatrice exchanged a glance with Camille, who stepped forward, her tone softening. "Louise, we need to know what's going on. You're not the only one. Please, help us understand." Louise hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "It's not the people here," she finally said, her voice trembling. "It's the men. From outside." Camille's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, from outside? How are they getting in?" Louise shook her head, her hands clutching the edge of the gurney. "They're not exactly from outside. You'll see if you look in the courtyard, between the bushes and the stone benches. That's where Joanna and the others go." Beatrice and Camille exchanged a look of disbelief. The courtyard. They had reviewed the footage countless times but had never noticed anything unusual. That evening, after the inmates had returned to their cells, Beatrice and Camille made their way to the courtyard. The moon cast long shadows over the stone benches and overgrown bushes. Following Louise's directions, they pushed aside the dense foliage and froze. There, hidden beneath the undergrowth, was a narrow opening in the ground. A tunnel. "This can't be real," Camille whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. She crouched down, shining a flashlight into the dark passage. The beam of light revealed a crude but functional tunnel, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. Beatrice's heart raced as the pieces fell into place. This is how they've been doing it. This tunnel. It must lead somewhere. They called for backup, and a team of guards followed the tunnel's path. After what felt like an eternity, the guards returned with the answer. The tunnel connected the women's prison to the men's prison next door. The discovery sent shockwaves through the prison administration. The tunnel, it turned out, was the result of a failed escape attempt years earlier. Instead of leading to freedom, it had created a secret link between the two facilities, a link that had been exploited for clandestine meetings. Camille and Beatrice informed the warden, who immediately ordered the tunnel sealed. To prevent further incidents, the administration introduced supervised intimate visits, ensuring that any future relationships would be conducted safely and legally. In the months that followed, the 5 babies born in prison were placed with the inmates' families, and the mothers continued to serve their sentences. The mystery of the pregnant inmates became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the lengths people would go to for connection, and the importance of vigilance. As for Beatrice and Camille, they shared a quiet laugh over coffee one evening, reflecting on the absurdity of it all. "Who would have thought," Camille said, shaking her head, "that the answer was right under our noses?" Beatrice smiled, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Sometimes the truth is simpler than we imagine. We just have to know where to look."